I climbed the corporate ladder by believing I was the smartest person in the room, until I realized my cold, heartless adherence to company policy had just made me the prime target of a federal-level investigation. By the time I understood that I was nothing more than a pawn in a dangerous organized scheme, the doors to my home were already being kicked in. I've spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder, surviving mergers, layoffs, and the kind of office politics that would make a Machiavellian prince sweat. I built my career at Sterling and Finch on the bedrock of cold, hard efficiency. I wasn't there to make friends, I was there to optimize, streamline, and protect the bottom line. But all that work, all those late nights and skipped anniversaries, crumbled into dust because I assumed I knew better than the person standing right in front of me. Her name was Maya. She had been working in our logistics department for 6 months. A brilliant strategist who could calculate supply chain efficiency in her head faster than our software could boot up. She was quiet, diligent, and, as I would soon find out, the only person with a shred of actual humanity in that ivory tower of a building. It was a Tuesday, the kind of gray, miserable morning that sets the tone for the rest of the week. I was rushing to a budget review meeting when I saw a commotion near the loading dock. One of the temporary contractors, a man who had clearly been struggling with severe health issues, had collapsed. He was clutching his chest, gasping for air, and the security team, led by Miller, a man who treated our lobby like a fortress rather than a workplace, was standing over him with his arms crossed, demanding that he get up and vacate the premises because he was blocking the primary entrance. Maya wasn't waiting for instructions. She had already kicked off her heels and was kneeling on the cold, greasy concrete, loosening the man's collar and using her own bag as a makeshift pillow to stabilize his head. She was shouting for someone to call an ambulance, her voice cracking with a mix of urgency and pure, unfiltered compassion. I walked up just as Miller grabbed Maya by the shoulder. "He's a liability, Maya," Miller barked, his face turning that ugly shade of purple he got when he felt his authority was challenged. "He's a transient contractor. You're making a scene, and you're making this company look soft. Get back to your desk before I write you up for insubordination." Maya didn't even look at him. She kept talking to the man, telling him to breathe, telling him help was coming. I saw her hand trembling, but her voice stayed rock steady. That's when my mistake, my massive, ego-driven, arrogant mistake, settled into my gut like a stone. Instead of stepping in to help, I looked at the crowd of onlookers, looked at the disruption this was causing to my morning schedule, and felt that familiar, toxic irritation. "Maya," I said, my voice cold enough to drop the temperature in the room. "The internal protocols are clear. We don't interfere with contractor health issues. We call the dedicated firm's emergency line, and we step away. You are compromising our liability insurance and creating a public spectacle. Leave the area now." She looked up at me then. Her eyes weren't just disappointed, they were piercing. "He's dying, Sarah. He's a human being, not a line item on a spreadsheet. I'm not moving." I didn't see a person in distress. I saw a problem. And in my world, problems were either solved or eliminated. I made a snap decision that would ruin my life. I walked over to HR an hour later, skipping the review meeting entirely. I didn't frame it as a woman saving a life. I framed it as a breach of company policy, a disruption of operations, and a blatant disregard for authority. By the end of the day, I had pushed through an emergency termination order. I watched as security escorted Maya out of the building. She didn't say a word as she walked past my glass-walled office, but she stopped for a split second, looked directly at the framed photo of my family on my desk, and smiled. It was a cold, pitying smile that chilled me to the bone. I told myself I'd done the right thing for the company. But when I got home that evening, I found an envelope tucked under my front door. No return address. just a flash drive and a single handwritten note. As I plugged the drive into my laptop, the screen flickered to life, revealing a high-definition video of the loading dock. A recording that clearly captured not just the incident, but the conversation I'd had with Miller, and the specific way I'd ignored the man's pulse to prioritize the company's reputation. But that wasn't the cliffhanger. As the video continued, it showed me that I hadn't just fired an employee. I had accidentally intervened in an active, undercover investigation being run by the Service of Internal Security, and my protocol had just obstructed a federal-level operation. My phone began to ring. It was the CEO, and his voice wasn't just angry. It was terrified. "Sarah," he whispered, "what have you done?" The CEO's voice was barely a tremor, but it hit me harder than any formal reprimand ever could. In the sterile, high-end silence of my living room, his fear tasted like copper. I sat there, the blue light of the monitor washing out my face, while the video played on loop. It wasn't just a recording of me being heartless. It was a digital map of my professional suicide. The video clearly showed Miller, my head of security, whispering instructions into a hidden lapel mic, and then it showed me, arrogant, cold, and legally blind to the situation, actively preventing Maya from providing life-saving assistance. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," the CEO said, his breathing ragged. "Do not delete anything. Do not leave your house. A team is coming to collect your devices. If you try to reach out to the press, or even to Maya, you will be facing an attempt to break your life with an accusation by a state body. We are looking at a possible charge for obstruction of a sensitive operation." I hung up, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The contractor on the ground hadn't been a random transient. The documents popping up on the flash drive behind the video file were heavily redacted, but the seals were unmistakable. This was a deep-cover initiative by the Service of Internal Security meant to root out a massive organized scheme operating within our supply chain. By firing Maya, I hadn't just ousted a whistleblower, I had exposed a deep-cover operative, potentially putting her life in immediate lethal danger. I paced the hardwood floor of my kitchen, my mind racing through every legal defense I could think of, each one dissolving as quickly as it formed. I had climbed to the top of the corporate world by assuming I was the smartest person in any room. I thought protocol was a shield, but it had just become a noose. I checked the windows, half expecting to see a tactical unit parked in my driveway. Instead, I saw a black sedan idling at the curb, its headlights extinguished, watching my house like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. My phone chimed. A text message from an unknown number. It contained a single GPS coordinate and the words, "You owe her your life, Sarah. You have until dawn to provide the missing authentication keys for the encrypted logistics servers, or we stop pretending you're an innocent witness." I knew what those keys were. They were the administrative codes that gave access to the international shipping manifests. If I handed them over, I was facilitating the very organized scheme that the internal security team was trying to dismantle. If I didn't, I was essentially choosing to be crushed by the machinery I had helped build. I sat down at my workstation, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I was effectively under house arrest, monitored by whoever was sitting in that sedan outside. Every instinct I had trained for 15 years told me to call the police, but the CEO's warning echoed in my ears. An attempt to break your life with a heavy accusation. They weren't just threatening to fire me anymore. They were threatening to bury me under a mountain of legal trouble that would result in an enormous, decades-long sentence. I took a deep breath and opened the secure server portal. I had a choice. Finish the corruption I had enabled and hope they let me walk away, or try to contact Maya, the woman I had humiliated and thrown to the wolves. As I typed in the primary access code, the screen flickered, and a new message window opened on my private terminal. It wasn't from the people in the car, and it wasn't from the company. It was a live feed of my own office. My desk, my chair, and the framed photo of my family were all there, but sitting in my chair wasn't my assistant. It was Maya. She was staring directly into the webcam, her expression cold and calculating, holding a folder marked with the same high-level government clearance I'd seen on the drive. She typed one sentence into the chat box, and my blood turned to ice. "I've been waiting for you to log in, Sarah, because you're not the only one who has been playing a part in this organized scheme." Before I could type a response, the power in my entire neighborhood died, plunging me into absolute darkness. Outside, the black sedan's engine roared to life, and the sound of heavy boots hit my front porch. Someone was kicking in my door, and I realized with a sickening thud that I had been played by everyone, the company, the investigators, and, most terrifyingly, the woman I thought I had ruined. The handle of my bedroom door turned, and a sliver of laser-sighted light cut through the dark. The door didn't just open, it splintered inward, the frame groaning under the force of a professional kick. I lunged backward, stumbling over my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Two figures entered, silhouettes carved out of the darkness by the harsh, tactical beams of their flashlights. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the worst. A heavy, suffocating weight of an accusation that would seal my fate for decades. "Get up, Sarah," a voice commanded. It wasn't the cold, calculated tone Maya had used in her message. It was precise, trained, and devoid of the corporate malice I'd become accustomed to. I opened my eyes to see Maya standing behind them. She wasn't dressed in her usual office attire. She was wearing tactical gear, her expression no longer that of the humiliated clerk, but of a seasoned operative. She pulled a handheld device from her belt, and suddenly the room was bathed in the soft blue glow of a signal jammer. The heavy, oppressive weight of the organized scheme that had been pulling my strings for 24 hours vanished. "The house is clean," she said to the two men. They retreated to the doorway, giving us space. Maya walked toward me, her footsteps silent on the rug. "You're wondering how I'm here, aren't you? How I went from a logistics analyst to someone who just turned your life upside down? You're not who you said you were," I whispered, my voice sounding thin and broken. "I'm an investigator with the Internal Security Service," she replied, her eyes searching mine. "We've been tracking a network of illicit shipments moving through Sterling and Finch for months. Miller was on the take, and your blind adherence to those toxic protocols made you the perfect, unwitting cover for them. You fired me because I was getting too close to the manifest discrepancies, and you were too focused on your own ego to see that I was literally trying to save your job and your life from the very criminals you were inadvertently shielding." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening clarity. The contractor on the loading dock hadn't been sick. He had been a courier, and he'd been carrying a packet with evidence that would have linked the board of directors to a series of illegal activities. I had been a pawn, a useful idiot who used company policy as a weapon, never realizing the weapon was being guided by the people I thought were my superiors. "The CEO called you because he's terrified," Maya continued, her voice softening just a fraction. "He knows the Internal Security Service is dismantling his board as we speak. They're facing dozens of years in prison for their role in this. And you were the final piece of evidence." "I'm going down with them, aren't I?" I asked, looking at the broken door. "I obstructed justice. I fired the person who was trying to stop a crime." Maya sighed, reaching into her jacket and pulling out a tablet. "You were arrogant, Sarah. You were cold, and you were complicit in a culture that values profit over human life. But you weren't part of the scheme. I have the logs of every interaction you've had. I have the proof that you were manipulated. If you cooperate, if you testify about the pressure from the board to ignore those logistics discrepancies, you won't be charged. You'll be a witness." I looked at the framed photo of my family on the desk. the very thing I had sacrificed my integrity to protect. I had spent 15 years building a fortress of status and authority, only to realize I was living in a cage. I looked at Maya, the woman I had tried to destroy, and saw the only lifeline I had left. "I'll testify," I said. It was the first honest thing I had said in years. The months that followed were a blur of depositions, internal security interrogations, and the slow, public collapse of Sterling and Finch. The board members, including the CEO who had begged me for silence, were arrested as they tried to flee the country. They faced a massive decades-long sentence for their role in the organized scheme. I lost my career, my reputation, and my penthouse. I spent months in therapy, unlearning the toxic efficiency that had made me a monster in my own office. I eventually moved to a small town, taking a job that didn't involve logistics, spreadsheets, or corporate ladder climbing. One afternoon, a year later, I received a package in the mail. It was a simple, unmarked envelope. Inside was a letter from Maya, wishing me well, and a photograph of the loading dock. Not the day she was fired, but a picture of a memorial plaque that had been placed there by the service to honor the people who had risked their lives to bring down the network. I realized then that I had been given a second chance. I had learned the hard way that when you prioritize a rulebook over a human being, you don't just lose your job, you lose your humanity. And as I walked out into the bright, unmanaged sunlight of my new life, I finally felt free.